Welcome back to the channel. I'm Amy Manuel, and with me today is Melissa McDonough, who's running for Texas's Congressional District 38, which is Northwest Harris County. Welcome back to the show, Melissa.
Thank you, Amy. I'm glad to be back.
Today, the subject is education, and there is so much happening right now on that front, and so much that we could be doing that's positive. And I'm just going to let you take it from there.
Well, I think one of the first things we look on a federal level is the dismantling or dissolving of the Department of Education. To be able to go to DC and see chains on those doors, frankly, it's heartbreaking. It's the society that we are going to have versus the one that we really want. We want an educated society. I think most voters would say that, yes, they want their children to be able to have access to higher education and not just access, but be able to afford it. And I don't think we understand what the federal government does as far as education and how it funds that. From a higher level, we look at going to college and being able to have Sally Mae, which is our government-backed loans, to be able to go to school, to afford to go to school. And I understand that that's a privilege. Even to have a loan is a privilege, but it's something that we have been able to do and offer to our families for many years. Um, it wasn't long ago in our history books that we know that education was free. As far as you wanted to learn, you could continue learning. And other countries still do that, which is why some of our students they go to Germany, they go to the UK, and they go get educated there and they work there while going to school. And that's how their education is paid for. It's covered by the government. Wouldn't that be a wonderful way to educate our advanced students?
And our kids, then they don't have they're not on the same footing as
That's right.
these people in other countries where their education is paid for. We're putting our own young people at a disadvantage because we're
That's
not
correct.
supporting them the way that other countries are.
Because it is a privilege. And I use that word because again, when we compare ourselves to other countries, it's a right, not a privilege. And when we talk about rights in our country, especially as Americans, we are all about freedom and our rights. But we don't have rights to education. We have privilege to education. And the federal taking care of that as far as colleges and universities and grants and so forth, that's one level. And secondary level is when we have our Title I kiddos. So in Congressional District 38, every school district has a Title I school,
What's
meaning
what's
that
Title One?
Title I means that there are students whose families are under the poverty level, which means under $40,000 a year. So that family makes less than 40,000. So the government will supplement for that student. So that comes in things like meal plans, additional, just notebook paper and being able to have special services and so forth for those kiddos. And they've depended on that. Those funding, again, that funding is going away. Funding for students that have a specific plan for them. These are our special needs, or I think it's ESI, special services. So that funding is a federal funding that is going away. Um, the four core classes in education is taken care of by the state of Texas. So math, reading, arithmetic, math, so history and science. Anything beyond that, so when you talk about your arts, your music programs and so forth, those were federally funded. And again, when you don't have those funding, I have questions. So we're Texas. We're all about Friday night lights and football and band and our baseball programs. And don't even get me into basketball and our volleyball teams. We have amazing softball, girls softball teams. Who pays for all that? Because if we're not going to have federal subsidies to help in our education, Texas, we're not going to have Friday night lights. And nothing brings a community together faster in especially rural Texas than Friday night football. I mean, grandparents and people in the community attend right here in our stadiums. There's a reason we do bonds to build big stadiums because everybody comes out for that. Again, though, if we don't have subsidies happening at a federal level, it will impact these other programs that bring our community together. And right now, they're looking at completely dissolving the Education Department of Education and moving Sally Mae funding to privatized business funding. That's then here a few weeks ago, they declared that what would be considered a professional degree has been altered. When you look at that list of professional degrees that are no longer professional, they are predominantly women professions. But my biggest concern when I look at that, they were the profession a child would be able to say that they're in a situation that's unsafe. Those positions, those professions are the ones that would notice if a child was being abused or was in an economic situation where they're not being fed or cared for. Those positions recognize that. So that education no longer being paid for, being able to get student loans for anymore because it's not a professional organization, a professional degree. So you're not going to be able to get advanced degrees in that profession. Not only is that going to make us a disadvantage, like you mentioned, globally, but it's really going to put us at a disadvantage on a community basis.
Mm. And another thing that has been happening within our school systems, and this is down, in the K through 12 area, when my son is 32 years old, but when he was in high school, one thing that was happening with him was he was getting bullied because he's gay. And then he and his friends got together and formed a gay straight alliance club there at his high school. This, anti DEI, which I don't understand which of those words is a problem for you, diversity, equity, or inclusion. Which one are you upset about? Um, that these organizations that support kids who are not uh, heteronormative, which is a big long word that I learned when I organized for a while here a P flag, which is for essentially it started by parents of people in the queer community. And so that to not have that support for these kids that are already getting bullied, that is a thing that concerns me.
And it should concern all parents, even if they don't have a child that is in the queer community or hasn't identified yet. Diversity, equity, inclusion is, I focus on the word inclusion, and it's for everyone. Wherever you are, whatever your struggle, whatever you're advancing in, even is to be able to make sure that we are taking care and we're being mindful of the whole child, not just the academic, not just the sports, but the mental health, which is health care, wherever that child is struggling or questioning. We are education. And that's where I also have a little bit of a disagreement with when parents say, I don't want my child educated in. You're going to school. These are the experts. They have a degree in this. They are the ones we are entrusting to educate our children. But you need to partner with them. you're still the parent. You still have responsibilities. And part of that is making sure that your child is also inclusive and being included and that their needs are met. That's why you parent, that's why you advocate for your child. Both of my children graduated early and went to college. They were on a different scale. They were on the advanced scale that had to be pulled back to be included. They went to college at age 14 and 16. So being able to have programs for them, even again, looking at the child as a whole child, regardless of their questions, regardless of how they're identifying, regardless of whether they're smart or they're struggling in a specific area. This is what we do. And we partner with the experts, our teachers, to make sure that our children are all educated.
I think that being focusing on inclusion is so important because one of the areas, the mental health area of our kids, I think, is part of the reason that we are having so much problem with things like school shootings,
Yes.
which, when you and I grew up, that wasn't even a thing.
So I did a forum. It was interesting. I participated in a forum with our junior college here, our community college with Lone Star. And one of the questions we talked about was gun violence in schools. That was one of the questions. And I asked the audience, and it was a full auditorium of students, how many of them had been trained on active shooter? And they all raised their hands. Amy, I had to apologize. That is my generation's fault. They should never have had to learn active shooter drills. That is our fault as the adults in the room.
Right.
Mental health, yes, plays a huge part in the fact that we don't see that as health care. And that doesn't have, mental health has nothing to do with your economic situation. People who are below the poverty level that are Title I schools have mental health issues along with people who are privileged and can afford private schools and so forth. They too. So this is focusing more on our students and how we are going to be there for them at the time they need the help. When we talk about gun violence, though, that is something we can do, we can take care of tomorrow. And we have to decide how we're going to do that. We have to decide that it's a priority. I have worked with Everytown, which is our federal level of gun violence and mom's demand. And one of the bills that simply keeps rearing its ugly head is House Resolution. I think it's 38. I don't have that paper in front of me, but I think it's 38, which is a guns reciprocity bill, allowing our gun rights of Texas. We can take them to any state we want, and they have to adhere to them. So the police there at the state that we're visiting would have to know our gun rights, first of all, and then allow us. So if you're going to a state that doesn't have concealed carry or open carry, because we're from Texas, we're allowed to do that. And that state may have gun licensing. We don't require that anymore. So they would have to adhere to that. That is opening up a whole Pandora's box. My first question is states' rights. At what point does the state have the right to say that this is what happens with my state? And even though you're from another state, you have to abide by our state laws. So again, where did states' rights go?
Mm-hmm. Well, and I think it's so frightening to me that we have so many guns now, and there are so many places. Like I said, when I am old enough to remember Duck and Cover, where we were given this fantasy that somehow our desk was going to protect us from a nuclear explosion.
Yes.
And we had that. But you know what we never had? We never had active shooter drills. Because
Never.
nobody even thought about you would take a gun to. Nobody I knew even had guns. Maybe they went hunting with their families because, I'm a Southeast Texas girl and a lot of hunting, a lot of hunting. Um, but they weren't, and I went to summer camp, learned how to shoot a bolt action rifle. But I can't even imagine somebody even thinking about bringing a gun to school. And yet, it happens almost daily now.
Yes. It is the number one killer of children. And again, it's not cancer. It's not the flu. It's not the measles. It's gun violence is the number one killer of our children to age 18. And it's something we can totally do something about. Now, do I think the guns are the problem? No. I think our regulations of who has a gun, meaning, yes, you do need to do a background check. If we just let you out of jail for murdering somebody or doing something criminal, you don't get it's a privilege. You don't get a gun. If if you have, I live in ranch property. So yes, they're here. We have guns and we have animals and we have coyote. We have all the things. But we also have responsible gun ownership. That is the key word, responsible gun ownership. You are responsible for that firearm. If that firearm gets into the hands of someone else, whether it be a child or a neighbor, and they commit a crime with it, that is your fault. It is your weapon that you allowed that person to have access to. So again, I don't think it's the guns that's the problem. I think it's the people who own guns that aren't being held responsible and accountable for that ownership. We need to do better. Those are laws that, again, we need to sit down and have a conversation of purpose and responsibility. Welcome
Hmm.
to adulting. Be an adult about it.
Right. And we need to have things like, you know, trigger locks and safes and keep those
Yes.
guns. I remember when I had my first child, my ex-husband was I'm just gonna say it, he was a gun nut. And he had like he had a couple of pistols and a couple of handguns, um a shotgun, a mini 14, I don't know. But when after my toddler after my son was born, I made him put all the guns in a cabinet over the refrigerator with a metal locking horseshoe
Hmm.
that needed a key
Right.
because my child could get into anything. I don't care what kind of child protective stuff you thought, he'll find a way around it.
I had two boys that became engineers, and we literally moved from our last house because my elementary kids literally helped each other get up on the stool, onto a chair, onto the counter to get to the top of my cabinets to get the flamethrower so they could go outside because they found little rocket engines. Okay, no big deal. But then took newspaper or notebook paper, made it into a rocket, and put their little green army guy with a parachute. They put him in the nose cone. I am literally watching my children down on the patio looking at going, what are they doing? At the moment that I hear, and they had lit that thing, and here came this little green army man with a parachute on fire. And I'm going, we're moving. We are moving. We can no longer be in subdivisions. I have those children. So, yes, those would be my kids. And I get that everybody has a different family situation. Um, but you and your family understanding gun education and responsibility is different than the kid who's coming to visit your children. They don't know. They may
Right.
not know. And it may be really cool because they've never been around a gun or seen one. that they're the ones who's going to go handle a gun. They're the ones that's going to touch it and not have any idea about the use or the power of it or the purpose even because they've never been educated on that. I have heard from families that really use it as a safety. It's security, part of their security assurance in their own homes. And I empathize that they are even in those situations where they're like, Melissa, we have to keep a loaded gun. That's just part of our security. And I'm like, but can you keep it locked? Again, put in some protocols, make sure that education is there with your own family and with anybody who may be visiting. Any kiddos that are coming over, anybody who's staying with you should probably understand and be educated a little bit on your firearms.
I
So
rem
back to education.
Yeah, back to education. We need that education on firearms, and we need and back to inclusion. When you start excluding people and making them not feel welcome and not feel heard and not feel accepted, that's when those children become the problem children that become they're going to act out. And maybe you had a gun at home and you thought it was safe, but I'm thinking back to that cabinet, and I think, it wouldn't have been long before my son would have figured out, oh, I'll just take the hinges off the cabinet.
Exactly.
And so,
I have those kids. I literally have those kids. I have one that works that's in the military that is in cyber warfare. So he's not into protecting you, he's into destroying you. So if you infiltrate us, he's going to send you back with a little backpack and you just became the suicide bomber on your own network. I had that kid growing up that was growing up in my house. The other one was an aerospace engineer. So he knew how to create rocket fuel and how to make explosions. And I'm going, oh my gosh, those are my children. So, yes, making sure that we are educating to the to the level of our family and those that visit with us and making sure that everyone has open space to talk because they won't even lean into those other areas. I call it the dark and twisties. They won't lean into those if we have ways for them to talk. So I always say, talk to children so they will listen, but listen so they will talk. And that comes back to some maybe we had dinner every night where it was no technology at the table. When we came together, it was an opportunity for us, even if it was a 10-minute before we shuffled off to band practice or off to cross country meets or whatever. We had that time where we would take just 5 minutes of how was your day? How you doing? What can I help you with today? Just those words, those few minutes meant the world to my kids. And now that they're adults, and I've asked them, what are some of the things that you're going to change with your family? And that is one of the things that both of my boys have said they want to keep with their kiddos is that 5-10 minute check-in every day, even if it's before they go to bed, if it's, just praying together at the end of the day and hearing their prayer out loud of this is what they're struggling with, or this is what's on their mind. When they were in elementary school, it was about lunch money and making sure that they had their lunch that day or they remembered their homework, and then you start hearing them later about a friend in class and how much they're recognizing the pain of someone else. And that is what they want to hold on to. They want to hold on to those 5 and 10 minutes where they were able to talk to their parent, not only about their day and where they are, but that the people that are in their sphere, in their little community, of their struggles and maybe the part that they play or they don't play in that person's life. And it makes me super proud as a mom that they can recognize that and that they see that as an advantage.
Well, let's wrap this up. What are your final thoughts of how we move forward when it comes to education?
I'm not a supporter of the vouchers. I'll put that out there because everywhere vouchers have been utilized, it has defunded public education and access to education to a point where it was hard to even rebound it. I am in support of parents being able to choose whom they partner with to educate their child. Public education, private education, homeschool, charter school, whatever you know your kid best. No one will ever know your child better than you do. So being able to have access to these different options, I'm all about. Absolutely. Being able to combine them, absolutely. But making sure that the funding is there for you and being able to make that partnership happen, that is the job of the federal government. And the state has their part to play in that. And being able to be competitive in their future with other countries, making sure that they can make a living wage. That doesn't start when they're 18 and you're like, oh, hey, you graduated from college or from high school. Congratulations. We start planning, especially thinking about that as parents, way back when they're these little kids in elementary school. How are we going to help them get that additional education? And it doesn't always have to be with colleges, it can be with trade schools and certifications and so forth. So our funding of their advanced education also needs to match that. We need to do a better job of Congress and making sure that we are there for our kiddos and those education from the time they are in daycare and need that daycare access all the way through advanced education.
Well, thank you so much for taking the time to speak with me today. Once again, Melissa McDonough, running for Congressional District 38, and your website is?
Melissa for Congress.com.
Thank you again.